So this is the topic 4.1 that is focusing on the conceptual framework. It follows from the previous topics that we looked at, and as research is a systematic process, we move step by step. Having looked at the literature review, now this brings us to the aspect of the conceptual framework that is closely linked to the literature review that we already covered. So to begin with, what is a conceptual framework? It is important for us to understand what a conceptual framework is and how it is distinguished from a theoretical framework and how it is also distinguished from a conceptual model. So I'll be able to take you through. What a conceptual framework means. But before I describe what a conceptual framework is, it is important to give you a story of a social scientist from England that spent 2 weeks conducting research in the Rwenzori Mountains National Park among the chimpanzees. This researcher returned to the University of Cambridge after she had studied her research for about 2 weeks. But when as she was trying to analyze the results, she found that there were some discrepancies of her results from other published researchers that studied the chimps. When she returned, did her observations again in the mountains for her to be able to understand why there are discrepancies, she found that actually there were a number of things that led her and her team astray. There are a number of assumptions that she had made about the daily activity patterns of the chimps. Her observation hadn't been long enough to detect some key aspects of the behavior of the chimp. And eventually, she concluded that actually even carefully collected results can be misleading if the underlying context of assumption is wrong. So what this story tells us is that when we are conducting research, there are a number of assumptions that we make, and those assumptions are very key to guiding the process of data collection and also to guiding the process of analysis and also reporting. So a conceptual framework is basically, as the name suggests, a system of concepts, assumptions, expectations, beliefs, and theories that support and inform your research. And it is a key part of research, meaning that you should not be able to undertake any research without having an underpinning conceptual framework, because that's what is actually informing the processes, the steps that you're going to follow subsequently when you're conducting research. Without it, you'll be like someone who is simply walking in the dark without direction and without knowing where he or she is heading to. So by definition, we see that Miles and Haberman in their book written in 1994 defined the conceptual framework as a visual or written product. By that part, it means that a conceptual framework may be visual or written. I know some of you have encountered conceptual frameworks are mainly used those conceptual frameworks that are visual, but actually a conceptual framework can also be written and also visually presented or written to explain either graphically or narrative form the main things to be studied. So also here we have underlined main things to be studied, meaning that in the conceptual framework, you should be able to identify the key main things that are to be studied. And these are usually in the form of factors, concepts, variables, and other presumed relationships among them. So, meaning that looking at this definition by Miles and Haberman, we see a conceptual framework should be a product. We shall come also to that aspect of a product, meaning that it is something that is prepared. And then also we should be able to see that there should be an explanation in the conceptual framework. And also we should be able to see the key main things that are to be studied and the relationship that exists among those things. That is very important because we find that in research, the different components must be able to come together to show how they contribute to each other in informing holistically a research. Then we also look now at what a conceptual framework entails, and we see that the actual ideas and beliefs that one holds about the phenomena studied, whether these are written down or not, entail a conceptual framework. So what are those actual ideas? What are those beliefs that you hold about the phenomena? So that, when explored, should be able to be put together in form of a conceptual framework, and it will actually entail it. So also, this, given that it is based on the ideas and beliefs, may also be called the idea context of the study. So by the idea context means that you not only bring about the idea you have, but also you present the context. And the context, which we refer to as the idea context, means that it should be able to resonate with the idea. This is different from a geographical context or the content context. So, but the idea context means that you have uh, an ideology, I would say, that is guiding your research. And that ideology is a collection of the different ideas. And that's why we talk about it as the idea context. So this part is very important as it differentiates conceptual framework from a theoretical framework. Usually, it is common to find that a conceptual framework and a theoretical framework are presented in research and sometimes are used interchangeably. But here, I'll beg to point out that unlike a conceptual framework that presents concepts, the theoretical framework presents theories. Theories and concepts are different. Theories actually focus on theoretical foundations of things, whereas concepts are actually those things that have been researched and have already been established to have a causal kind of relationship, but are not necessarily theory. So, the theoretical framework presents a tentative theory of what is going on with the different things. Okay? So, and also it presents the why. Why is there a particular relationship? So, meaning that a theoretical framework is a tentative theory. So, the function of the theory is to inform the rest of your research, ranging from the research design to the analysis of findings. So, meaning that the conceptual framework focuses on theories, whereas a conceptual framework relies on the concepts, whereas a theoretical framework relies on theories. But it is important to understand that both the conceptual framework and the theoretical framework are very key in guiding your research because they represent the lens through which you look at your research. They present the glasses through which you look at your research. And both the conceptual and the theoretical framework guide the process of the research, from the research design to the presentation of findings. Therefore, you can choose to adopt a conceptual or a theoretical framework for your study. That's why in the subsequent subtopics, we shall be able to talk about conceptual and or theoretical. So, depending on the type of your research, you can choose to use a conceptual or theoretical framework. Those innovative researchers may actually combine the two and present as a conceptual stroke theoretical framework. The most important aspect is that you should be able to know which components are theoretical and which components are conceptual. Then, this part also distinguishes a conceptual framework for a model. So we see that a model represents a specific situation, whereas a conceptual theoretical framework is much more general. And then also, we see that a model is narrower in scope. You find that it is looking at one or two relationships among the variables, or even three, and it is much more narrower than the conceptual or theoretical framework. And also, a model is much more precise in the assumption and the relationships, whereas a conceptual model, whereas a conceptual framework and a theoretical framework are much more generalist in nature, in that they are not very specific in terms of assumptions. They are actually more of exploratory and explanatory, meaning that when you are using a model, it becomes much more specific because of the predictions you want to make and the investigation you want to make specifically on specific variables. Whereas when you're using a theoretical framework or a conceptual framework, you are actually exploring, trying to understand the different relationships that exist among the different variables. So this has been our topic 4.1.